The road was quiet as evening settled in and the sky slowly turned dark. Caleb Morris drove his old gray car at a steady speed, keeping both hands on the wheel. He liked calm drives because they gave him time to think. The radio played softly, and the sound barely filled the space inside the car. Caleb had just finished dinner with an old friend and was heading home. His mind was relaxed, and nothing about the night felt unusual. Suddenly blue lights flashed behind him. The sharp glow filled his mirrors and broke the calm of the drive. Caleb felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. He did not panic, but he understood what moments like this could become. He slowed down, signaled, and pulled his car to the side of the road. He turned off the engine and placed both hands on the steering wheel. His movements were slow and careful. Caleb had learned long ago that stillness could sometimes keep trouble away. He sat quietly as a patrol car stopped behind him. A young officer stepped out of the car. The officer walked with quick steps and a firm posture. His eyes were sharp and serious as he approached the window. Caleb watched him through the side mirror. The officer stopped beside the car and looked inside. His gaze moved over Caleb's face, his jacket, and the inside of the vehicle. There was no greeting. There was no smile. "License and registration," the officer said. Caleb nodded once. "Yes, officer," he replied in a calm voice. He reached slowly into his jacket and then toward the glove box. Every movement was steady and clear. The officer watched closely as Caleb handed over the documents. He took them and stepped back slightly. He looked at the papers and then back at Caleb. His eyes lingered longer than needed. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked. "Dinner with a friend," Caleb said. "I'm heading home now." The officer did not respond right away. He shined his flashlight into the back seat even though the light was not needed. He leaned closer to the window and looked again. "Where do you live?" the officer asked. "Just a few blocks from here," Caleb answered. The officer straightened up and walked around the car. He checked the trunk and the tires. He looked under the car and then back at Caleb. Cars passed by, but no one slowed down. Caleb stayed still and silent. His face showed patience, not fear. Inside, he felt tired of moments like this. He had lived long enough to know the pattern. The officer returned to the window. "You know why I stopped you," he said. "No, officer," Caleb replied. "I believe I was driving within the limit." The officer shook his head. "You did not stop fully at the sign back there," he said. Caleb knew he had stopped. He always stopped fully. Still, he did not argue. "I apologize if it appeared that way," he said. The officer stared at him for a moment. Then his tone changed. "Step out of the car," he said. Caleb paused only briefly. He opened the door and stepped onto the road. His knees felt stiff, but he stood upright. Even at his age, his posture was strong and dignified. The officer gestured toward the curb. "Hands behind your back," he said. Caleb followed the instruction without hesitation. His hands rested calmly behind him. The officer moved closer and began to check him. "You carrying anything?" the officer asked. "No," Caleb replied. The officer let out a short breath. "People usually say that," he said. Caleb looked straight ahead. He did not respond. The road stretched out in front of him, quiet and empty. The officer finished and stepped back. "Sit down," he ordered. Caleb slowly lowered himself onto the curb. The cold concrete pressed through his clothes. He folded his hands in his lap and waited. The officer walked back to his patrol car with the documents. He sat inside and turned on the computer. The radio made a low crackling sound. Caleb watched the sky as it grew darker. Streetlights flickered on one by one. The moment felt long, but he stayed calm. Inside the patrol car, the officer typed in the name. He leaned closer to the screen. His face tightened slightly. He typed again, slower this time. He looked at the screen and then at Caleb sitting on the curb. His confidence began to shift. Something did not match his expectation. Caleb remained still. He had faced many rooms filled with pressure. He had listened while others judged him without knowing who he was. This moment felt small compared to those days. The officer picked up the radio and spoke quietly. He listened for a response. His eyes widened just a little. Caleb sensed a change in the air. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply waited. The officer stepped out of the patrol car again. His walk was slower now. He glanced down at the papers in his hand. Caleb looked up at him calmly. Their eyes met briefly. The officer looked away. The quiet road seemed to hold its breath. The simple traffic stop was no longer simple. A truth was beginning to rise, one the officer never expected. The officer stood beside the patrol car and stared at the screen again. The name on the report did not match the picture in his head. He blinked and read it slowly, then checked the date of birth. His jaw tightened as confusion replaced confidence. Caleb Morris remained seated on the curb. His hands rested calmly on his knees. His breathing was slow and even. Years of experience had taught him how to wait without showing discomfort. The officer stepped away from the car and looked at Caleb from a distance. He tried to see him differently now. The old jacket no longer looked ordinary. The calm posture now seemed deliberate and practiced. The officer cleared his throat. "Sir," he said, his voice less sharp than before. Caleb looked up slowly. "Yes, officer," he replied. The officer hesitated. He glanced back at the patrol car, then at the road. Passing vehicles continued without noticing the change unfolding. "I need to ask you a few more questions," the officer said. "That is fine," Caleb replied. The officer took a step closer. "Can you confirm your full name?" he asked. "Caleb Morris," Caleb said. The officer nodded and swallowed. "And your occupation?" he asked. Caleb paused for a brief moment. "I work in law," he answered calmly. The officer raised his eyebrows slightly. "In law," he repeated. "Yes," Caleb said. The officer looked unsettled. He had expected a different answer. He shifted his weight and glanced again at the patrol car. "Can you be more specific?" the officer asked. Caleb kept his voice steady. "I serve at a federal level," he said. The words landed quietly but carried weight. The officer felt it even if he did not fully understand yet. The officer took another step back. His tone softened further. "I apologize for the delay," he said. Caleb nodded politely. "I understand," he replied. Silence stretched between them. The officer's earlier confidence had faded. His movements were slower now, more careful. The officer returned to the patrol car again. He picked up the radio and spoke in a low voice. He confirmed the information a second time. The reply came quickly this time. His shoulders dropped slightly. His face turned pale. Caleb watched without expression. He had seen this moment many times in different forms. People often changed once they learned who he was. It always disappointed him. The officer stepped out again. He walked toward Caleb with visible restraint. "Sir," he said, "there seems to be some confusion." Caleb stood slowly, using his legs carefully. "There is no confusion," he said calmly. The officer shook his head. "No, I mean I was not aware," he said. "Not aware of what?" Caleb asked. The officer hesitated again. He looked around, as if hoping the road would help him escape the moment. "Of your position," he said quietly. Caleb looked at him steadily. "My position should not matter," he said. The words were not angry. They were simple and honest. The officer felt a deep discomfort settle in his chest. He realized how differently he had acted just minutes earlier. He remembered his tone and his assumptions. "I treated you unfairly," the officer admitted. Caleb studied his face. "What made you decide that now?" he asked. The officer opened his mouth, then closed it. He could not find an easy answer. "I made a mistake," he finally said. Caleb nodded slowly. "Mistakes reveal habits," he said. The officer looked down at the ground. The truth of the statement struck hard. "I stopped you without cause," the officer said. "I questioned you without reason." "Yes," Caleb replied. The officer straightened his uniform. "I apologize for my behavior," he said. Caleb did not respond right away. He looked at the road again. He thought of the many others who did not receive apologies. "Do you know why I stayed calm?" Caleb asked. The officer shook his head. "Because anger would not protect me," Caleb said. The officer listened closely now. He was no longer in control of the moment. "I have seen law used to harm and to heal," Caleb continued. "The difference is the person holding it." The officer nodded slowly. He felt small under the weight of the words. "I will not file a complaint," Caleb said. "But I will remember this." The officer looked surprised. "Why?" he asked. "Because memory is responsibility," Caleb replied. The officer handed back the documents with shaking hands. "I am sorry," he said again. Caleb took them calmly. "Learn from this," he said. The officer stepped back. "Yes, sir," he replied. Caleb returned to his car and opened the door. He paused before getting in. "One more thing," he said. The officer looked up quickly. "Yes," he said. "You stopped me as a stranger," Caleb said. "Treat the next stranger better." The officer nodded silently. Caleb sat inside the car and closed the door. He started the engine. The radio came back on softly. The patrol car lights turned off. The officer remained standing on the roadside. Caleb drove away slowly. The road opened in front of him once again. Behind him, a young officer stood still, changed by a truth he had not expected. Caleb Morris drove slowly through the quiet streets as night settled fully over the town. Streetlights reflected off the windshield and moved like soft shadows across his face. His hands rested calmly on the wheel, but his thoughts were active and heavy. The stop was over, yet the moment stayed with him. He turned into his neighborhood, a place of small homes and trimmed lawns. The same houses had stood there for years, watching generations grow older. Caleb parked his car in the driveway and turned off the engine. He remained seated for a few seconds, listening to the silence. Inside the house, the lights were low and warm. Caleb hung his jacket carefully and placed his keys on the table. The house smelled faintly of old books and tea. This space had seen long nights of study and early mornings of responsibility. He sat in his favorite chair near the window. From there, he could see the street and the slow passing of time. He closed his eyes briefly and let the memory of the stop return. The officer's voice. The assumptions. The sudden change once truth appeared. Caleb did not feel anger. He felt concern. Concern for how easily power could be misused. He stood and walked toward a bookshelf filled with thick volumes. Many of them held laws he had helped interpret. Some held decisions that shaped lives far beyond his own. Caleb had spent decades believing in fairness. Not the loud kind spoken in speeches, but the quiet kind practiced daily. Moments like the traffic stop reminded him how fragile that belief could be. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight. Caleb dressed simply and left the house early. A driver met him at the gate and opened the door respectfully. As the car moved through the city, people hurried along sidewalks. They carried coffee cups and bags, unaware of the forces guiding their lives. Caleb watched them with care. Every decision he made in his role touched people like them. At the courthouse, the building stood tall and calm. Its stone walls carried history and responsibility. Caleb entered through a quiet entrance and walked familiar halls. Clerks greeted him politely. Colleagues nodded with respect. No one mentioned the stop. In his chamber, Caleb reviewed documents laid neatly on the desk. Cases waited for judgment. Voices waited to be heard through paper and argument. Yet his thoughts returned to the roadside. To the officer who saw a stranger instead of a citizen. To the moment authority forgot its purpose. Later that day, Caleb sat in session. He listened carefully as lawyers spoke. Each word mattered. Each pause carried meaning. Caleb asked thoughtful questions. His tone was steady and fair. Those watching could not see the night before in his calm expression. During a break, a fellow judge approached him. "You seem thoughtful today," the judge said. Caleb smiled lightly. "Every day gives us reason to be," he replied. That evening, Caleb returned home again. This time, he made tea and sat at his desk. He opened a notebook he rarely used. He began to write. Not a ruling. Not a decision. Just thoughts. He wrote about power and patience. About how authority without understanding becomes dangerous. About how dignity should not depend on status. Across the city, the young officer sat alone in his apartment. The night felt different for him now. He replayed the stop again and again in his mind. He remembered his tone, his assumptions, the calm strength of the man on the curb. He had joined the force to protect. Somewhere along the way, fear had replaced purpose. The officer stared at his uniform hanging on the wall. For the first time, he questioned how he wore it. The next day at work, he moved differently. He listened more. He spoke less. During another stop, he greeted the driver politely. He explained the reason clearly. The exchange ended calmly. The change was small but real. Days passed. The memory of that night did not fade for either man. For Caleb, it became fuel. For the officer, it became a mirror. One afternoon, a case landed on Caleb's desk involving public conduct and fairness. He read it carefully. He understood its weight more deeply than before. His ruling was clear and thoughtful. It emphasized responsibility over power. It reminded those who enforced rules why they existed. The decision spread quietly through legal circles. Some praised it. Others reflected on it. Caleb returned home that evening with a sense of quiet resolve. He knew change did not happen overnight. But moments mattered. He stood by the window again, watching the street. Cars passed. Lives continued. Somewhere, another stop would happen. Another choice would be made. Caleb hoped that choice would be better. The city moved forward in quiet ways as days turned into weeks. Life continued with routines that most people never questioned. Caleb Morris remained steady within that movement. Each morning he rose early and prepared for the work ahead. He read carefully and listened deeply. His decisions carried weight, but he never treated them lightly. The memory of the traffic stop stayed with him, not as anger but as purpose. He believed moments of clarity should not be wasted. They should be shaped into guidance. One afternoon, Caleb was invited to speak at a small legal forum. The room was filled with young professionals and public servants. They listened closely as he stood at the front. He spoke about fairness and restraint. He spoke about dignity and responsibility. He did not mention the traffic stop directly. Still, his words carried the lesson. Authority is strongest when it is calm, he said. Power should never need fear to stand tall. The room remained silent as people absorbed his message. Some nodded slowly. Others sat very still. When the talk ended, a few stayed behind to thank him. Caleb greeted each person with the same respect. Titles did not matter to him in moments like these. That same evening, the young officer finished his shift and sat in his patrol car. He looked at the road ahead with different eyes now. Each stop felt heavier, but also clearer. He had started asking himself questions before acting. He wondered why he felt nervous in certain moments. He wondered how often fear had guided him. At home, he opened a notebook and began writing short thoughts. Not rules. Not reports. Just reflections. He wrote about the man on the curb. About the calm voice and steady eyes. About how respect changed everything. Weeks later, the officer volunteered for a community meeting. He sat among residents and listened to their concerns. Some spoke with frustration. Some spoke with hope. The officer did not interrupt. He listened. Caleb heard about the meeting through a brief report. He smiled quietly when he read it. Change often began in small, unseen ways. One morning, Caleb received a letter at his home. It was handwritten and careful. The return address was unfamiliar. He opened it slowly and read each line. The officer had written to him. The letter spoke of reflection and growth. It spoke of learning without excuses. It ended with gratitude, not praise. Caleb folded the letter and placed it on his desk. He did not reply right away. Some lessons did not require answers. Later that week, Caleb sat in his chair by the window once more. The street outside was calm and ordinary. Children played down the block. He thought about the systems people trusted every day. He thought about how fragile trust could be. He thought about how easily it could be strengthened or broken. Caleb knew he could not change everything. But he also knew that his presence mattered. His calm mattered. Across town, the officer completed another shift. This time, he drove home feeling steady. Not proud. Not ashamed. Just aware. He parked his car and looked at the sky. The stars were faint but visible. The road that once held tension now held memory. Memory had become guidance. Caleb stood from his chair and turned off the light. The house settled into quiet. Another day had ended. Somewhere, another driver would be stopped. Another choice would be made. This time, the outcome might be different. Not because of a title. Not because of power. But because understanding had found its way in.